Even in this new rendition of the Suns, the Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton tandem pick and roll is going to need to be at the foundation of a lot of what they're doing, whether it's just to set an advantage, to get things rolling, to generate movement from the defense, to then get into something they want to do. It's going to be something that they just really have to continue to have as a focal point of everything they're doing, because it's going to allow for those two to obviously play within the advantages based off of the spacing that they'll now have with Kevin Durant in the starting lineup, in addition to Devin Booker and whoever else they might feel like suffices most at that fifth spot as a starter. But also because it allow for specifically Devin Booker and Kevin Durant to play off of advantages created from others, whether that's a helper helping over, trying to tag on DeAndre Ayton's role, a helper trying to pinch in on Chris Paul as he snakes through and maneuvers in the mid-range. Those type of scenarios, or even if Chris Paul is coming off going towards a single side, or the opposite of that, where someone has to tag a roller from a single side and it's Kevin Durant that's on the single side, or Devin Booker that's on the single side, they're going to be consistently putting defenses in situations where they have to make decisions that are going to always have repercussions. And it's going to be just a lot of read and react for the Suns offense, but starting with them dictating in terms of getting into positions on the court where teams might not necessarily want them to operate from. So I just want to dive into some of what's been going on for the last 2 weeks with the Suns in pick and roll between Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton, but looking exclusively at what was going on in Friday night's win over the Pacers in pick and roll. All right, this first play here, we're going to see Chris Paul just doing what he does, coming off of the screen, but I want to pay attention to also, even though this is a miss from DeAndre Ayton, the premise of everything here. So, of course, Chris Paul is coming off, and he's going to engage Miles Turner as he comes off. And also credit, again, another premise of everything was DeAndre Ayton's screening and his ability to help Chris Paul while Chris Paul works to get separation. So Chris Paul comes off, and he's engaging Miles Turner in his drop. It's a moderate drop. It's not too deep of a drop. But also, outside of the screen, let's look at how they're manipulating spacing. So we got Devin Booker, who's eventually going to shake up and kind of replace where Chris drove from. As you can see there with Mathurin. So Mathurin is preoccupied with Booker, so he can't tag the roller as a high tagger. But also, because the high tagger can't tag, the low tag is also being removed, as we see on the baseline, Torrey Craig running. Originally, the low man would be Tyrese Halliburton, but now Halliburton's going to have to toggle to a different position defensively because Torrey Craig's running the baseline. And in addition to him running the baseline, emptying that corner and emptying any type of hand help on his pass to Ayton from Chris Paul, Craig is also receiving an exit screen. So not only can Halliburton, he can't just stay there and post up in the paint and wait for the roll, but they also have to navigate this exit screen here if Chris Paul wanted to look to his left and hit Torrey Craig. Now imagine that's Kevin Durant. If Devin Booker is the high guy over here, the high eye, if it's Kevin Durant that's running the baseline here and receiving an exit screen, what type of energy, what type of difference in energy and urgency are we going to see from Tyrese Halliburton to get over the screen, or the reaction that it's going to get in general from both players involved on the exit screen? That's just a little compromising situations that they're going to be able to put teams in on a consistent basis as they start to get their entire team back whole. And also adding players like TJ Warren into the mix, or even if that's Damian Lee that might be running the baseline. And all of these players that are borderline elite, if not elite three-point shooters, just spaced around the pick and roll from Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton. All right, this next one here, we're going to see them off a sideline out of bounds. Chris Paul just manipulating and kind of thinking the game 2 and 3 speeds ahead of where everybody else is. So he's going to come off the initial handoff. He gets an under, so it flips into a rescreen. Gets the over, gets his defender trailing behind him. And then this wicked yo-yo dribble. Again, the yo-yo dribble is just so nasty. This wicked yo-yo dribble that kind of makes everything just pause for a second. It has, it's like it has ether on it. It just allows for him to pull the strings at everybody, makes everybody pause, and he's able to get into a midi layup off of the yo-yo dribble. All right, and then this next one here, we're gonna see it's gonna be 3 on the baseline here as they manipulate the spacing, and they respace after that. So we got DeAndre Ayton and Chris Paul in the pick and roll again. Miles Turner's a little bit higher up on his drop than he was in that last rep that we showed to open. And then we're also going to see Damian Lee and Torrey Craig respacing as the screen happens. And then Chris Paul, again, after a great screen from DeAndre Ayton, is going to hit the snake dribble. And then he's going to drag out Miles Turner. That's going to allow for a switch to occur, a late switch. And then as that happens, DeAndre Ayton is going to nosedive right to the restricted area, right to the front of the rim. He's going to get a great high-pointed catch off the pass from CP3, and he's going to lay it in. But we're going to look at another little thing with it all. So we got Torrey Craig. He's going to be lifting up. That's going to create space. And then we're also going to look at who's in the corner. I mentioned it's Damian Lee. So Halliburton has a sense of urgency in terms of wanting to tag DeAndre Ayton because it's a switch that's been manipulated, but he also has the responsibility of one of the best three-point shooters in the corner, which is a dynamic I was speaking on in the opening play. And Chris Paul is able to move him with his eyes. So he goes to tag, of course, Halliburton does. Gets the tag. As he tags, Chris Paul understands that he also has to have that urgency to get back and make this dynamic closeout to Damian Lee. So Chris uses his eyes as well as the ball to kind of pump fake and then throws this no-look. As you can see, Halliburton realized where he's actually going with the pass, and he ends up being completely out of position, and Ayton's able to get that to go down. All right, this next one here, we're going to see Chris reject the screen here. So he's going to reject as the Pacers weak him, keep him to as weak can. And then he's going to go from being weak to engaging two. And as that happens, again, we're talking about the players around them in pick and roll. If that's Devin Booker in the corner, if that where Ish Wainwright is at the top left side of the screen, if that's Devin Booker, if that's Kevin Durant, if that's TJ Warren, if that's Damian Lee, if that's Landry Shamet, they're not going to necessarily want for Mathurin to do what he does here and kind of use Ish as a help point to aid on the roll and load up on the roll of DeAndre Ayton that's really been hurting them to this point in the game. Now, Ayton's able to stop and knock this midi down as he's able to do consistently, but just think about if it's one of the aforementioned shooters that I mentioned earlier in this play. Mathurin's not going to peel off of this because he's going to have responsibility as the low man to not just tag but also have to get back. And he's also not going to help this far off of either one of those two, even if the Pacers are loading up and zoning up on the weak side as they are here. It's going to just make them be a lot more honest in how they're playing defensively. And it's going to generally just allow for more space for Ayton to either pull this if he wants to, with Tice eliminate Mathurin from this, and look at how far away Tice is as Chris Paul kind of just entices him. And you see that happen. Just pay attention to that, and then also just think about how the space that Ayton has. If he wants to pull this, he can, but also he will have the space to get into his pound dribble combinations, whether that's a pound to a spin move, a pound to a Euro step, or a pound to a pump fake and getting free throws up. He will have a litany of options to get to just off of the spacing alone that they can potentially have and will have moving forward. All right, this next one here we're going to see, again, spread pick and roll. Look at Ayton's flat screen, though, and how it discards of the initial ball handler's defender and the separation and space that it gives Chris to snake off of, which then allows for Chris to tug at the strings of everybody else. Everyone's playing honest on the side. As you can see, it's Damian Lee here that's above the break and spacing to the proverbial 4-point line. So that spacing dynamic and that general threat of shooters around allows for Chris to get into that pocket that he loves to get to around that right elbow. And he's able to pump, and then we're going to be able to see DeAndre Ayton get into a dynamic that makes him great. And it's kind of like a stampede as he plays behind the snake dribble, but it's just generally allowing for him to attack off the dribble. And that's where he's able to get into that pound dribble that I mentioned in the last play, get into that spin move, and get that hook shot up over the left shoulder, and that's money. All right, and then here, this is a dynamic that I love to see from the Suns when they seldomly do it, but I would love to see them do it a lot more. With just getting Chris Paul in these scenarios where he's able to get downhill and moving into a pick and roll rather than doing it from a static dribble, which is about what he does, I would say, like 80 to 85% of the time here. So seeing him get into this touch action, I also like it when he's coming off a dribble handoffs, whether that be Zoom or Chicago or their Miami action. But here is touch action, and you can see him on the move is able to get him downhill more. So the touch action forces a switch, and Halliburton goes under the initial switch, and it's a weak switch. There's no like pressure being put on Chris Paul as he gets the ball on the switch. So he's able to get a good screen from Ayton, a little brush screen, and then Chris is able to get downhill, get below the free throw line, and get into that short mid-range and knock it down. And then the very next possession is we can see Chris Paul imploring for them to run the same play again and then directing traffic as he crosses the half-court line. We're going to see the away screen, And then look at the reaction it gets from Tyrese Halliburton this time. So he's switching aggressively this time. He's up to touch, and then he's able to try to hedge out on Chris Paul. So operating on the fly here, we're going to see Chris change direction, but also look at DeAndre Ayton reading and reacting as well. Getting into a great position on the screen. There's no way to navigate this from Tyrese Halliburton. You just have to eat it, and he has to end up sticking to this screen that DeAndre Ayton setting. It's an excellent screen, gets the separation for CP3, and he's able to get again to the mid-range and knock it down. All right, this next one here, we're going to see another pick and roll, of course, and Chris Paul able to get his primary defender on his backside based off of just the presence of DeAndre Ayton. There's no real screen set here, but the fact that Ayton is there allows for Chris Paul to gain leverage. As he gains the leverage, he's then able to hit the brakes as he does best, putting him in jail. But look at the reaction it's getting from the help defense as we look at Chris Duarte as well as Benedict Mathurin. So they're trying to load up on the roll again, as I mentioned a few plays ago. And as they try to negotiate this in real time, Chris Paul is reading and reacting to that as well. But not only is it CP3, but it's Damian Lee, who's also able to just kind of play behind the screen here, just relocate, get into a pump fake to also add to the advantage that he created off his movement. And then he's able to get into the mid-range for a nice little soft touch floater. And that induces a timeout from Rick Carlisle and company. All right, this next one here, we're going to see the Suns get into their 21 Nash. So we're going to see the pistol action, the 21 part, and then they get the double screen, which is the Nash dynamic for Devin Booker. And this is not necessarily a play that we're going to highlight, but it's going to lead into the next play as we see Josh Okogie spot up at the proverbial 4-point line again. Look at the spacing dynamic. And he's able to knock that down off of the handheld from Buddy Hield. All right, so now the play that we really want to zoom in on here, they're going back to the same play the next possession again. 21 Nash, but there's a twist to it. So we got Devin Booker coming off. And then again, Chris Paul thinking 2-3 light years ahead of everyone else on the floor is able to dupe the defense with the little Steve Smith hesitation dribble, a move that he's had in his bag with his left hand for the entirety of his career. A little change of pace here. You see the Pacers get ready to load up for the switch. He hits the fake dribble, and look at the separation it creates and gets himself downhill. He's able to engage Miles Turner, and now it's essentially a pick and roll. As you see him, it's like he rejected the screen. He leaves his primary defender in the rear view, and now Ayton's able to roll based off of the attention that Chris Paul is getting. Ayton's able to beat the veer back to the spot. Chris Paul is able to deliver it to him on his bounce pass, and they just completely exploit the Pacers defense here, just thinking ahead of time. And then on this last play here, we're going to see Chris Paul again coming off the screen, getting a great screen from DeAndre Ayton to create the separation. Look at the separation they get. Also making the primary defender stick to Ayton's screen again. And then based off of the spacing again, look, this time it's Okogie who's going to be the high guy here. But he's playing behind the screen, so Halliburton has to stay honest. And then Okogie's also hit a couple of threes, so they don't necessarily want to leave him open. Imagine if that's Kevin Durant or Devin Booker there. They're definitely going to have enough space for Chris to maneuver in the mid-range. And then also look who's in the low corner here as for the low man. That's Damian Lee. So there's not going to be any extreme help, if any help at all, off of that corner because of who's there, who's occupying that space. So Chris comes off, and he's able to have enough real estate to snake dribble and then get an extra dribble that he might not necessarily have if there were other players in these positions. And he's able to get into this floaty. And then, I'm sorry, here's the last play here. So we're going to see them get into their Chicago action. And then here's the twist that they've put into it where they have the get man who's going to eventually get the handoff, set the initial screen, a player flies up from the corner, and then they flip around and then set the screen for who they truly want to get it. So it just kind of throws off the pace and the switching and the low enough for top locking and things of that nature that happen in these three-player scenarios. So Chris is able to come off, and TJ McConnell's muddying up the pace of this as he typically does. But look at the relationship between CP3 and DeAndre Ayton here. Ayton's seeing where McConnell is, and Chris is being patient. And they're just waiting for the right opportunity to pounce. They get McConnell to fall for the bait as Chris looks over his right shoulder. And McConnell tries to slip it and kind of cheat the screen. And then DeAndre Ayton astutely flips his angle. Chris is ready for it and waiting for it. It happens. And then guess what? Chris Paul has now created the separation based off of the great screen set by DeAndre Ayton, getting into that lower leg, making TJ McConnell struggle to navigate it. And then Chris is getting downhill. He's engaging the rollers, man, who's Daniel Tice. And now he's able to hit DeAndre Ayton on that short roll like I mentioned. And Ayton's able to do, again, like I mentioned before as well, what he does best. getting into that short roll area and playmaking off of that for himself as a scorer. Gets into that pound dribble, and he's able to completely negate the rim protection from Tice, and able to get over to the other shoulder and get over to that hook shot going over the left shoulder. Just the way these two are negotiating in pick and roll is going to continue to be at the premise of everything the Suns are doing. It's going to allow for easier looks and easier shots for Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and company. And it's also going to allow for them to continue to play off of the advantages created from those two, whether it's a paint touch from Ayton or from Chris Paul maneuvering and navigating the mid-range.